So before we dive into this, Doc, I absolutely loved Harbors of the Holocaust.
Oh, thank you.
I got to see it on PBS. As a good Jewish boy, I did not know this story, but fascinating. Can you talk to me about your getting into documentaries, how this kind of worked for you? I mean, you've produced so much material, but what got you onto that side of the world, and especially finding these unique stories you found?
I think it's really hard to start because I started my career as an independent filmmaker. I came to the U.S. to study documentary, and then I went back to China, live in the industry of indie filmmakers in China for 7 years. And it was at the time that I began to realize, because we had no market in China for documentary, there's no funding source, there's basically nothing. So many of the filmmakers went westward to find funding, resource, creative support. And in a way, also, I started to notice, because of that, they start to feed the Western stereotypes of what people think of China, and by necessity in a lot of ways. And also, but because all these resources are outside of China, this is kind of expected in a way, but also sad in a way. And I start to realize there's a problem with that. And so since then, I started to make a commitment that I need to make films that need to be seen in China as well. And also the perspective as a filmmaker, as a journalist that we provide, has to be justified and also needed by our own society. So in this kind of way, I have started to kind of launch my own career and journey about finding something that's unique and universal at the same time, that it's a story that, even interesting to the Chinese public, but at the same time providing a universal access point so people from outside of China can also find a way to relate and connect to it. It's very, very hard, because I think for people outside of China to see China in a different way, and they need emotional connection to it. And I don't think we as filmmakers from another culture should expect that what we present is what we think interesting is other people will also think interesting. So we have to make that effort to build that bridge. So I little by little, film by film, I started to create my own creative voice of finding a way to bridge. And that's what I really care about. And also provide a sense of nuance and complexity and subtlety for people to see a different kind of perspective that they're not familiar with about China. And also, I think it's also our responsibility to educate audience in a certain way that will draw them in, but also help them to see and think of something different.
I love that you use the word nuance and subtlety, because that's how I'd explain this movie. It is so almost calming to watch what these women are doing. Can you talk a bit about the complexity of the language, the Nushu language, but also because it was a secret language, a hidden language, how we get to see in just the snippets of these two women doing this and learning about it that there had to be subtlety and nuance to even the language being briefly sung or the written material. Otherwise, they would have been found out, so many of these women in the past. How important was nuance and subtlety to not just telling the story, but in essence, the language that you were telling us about? Like there's a similarity between telling this secret and them having to hide this secret for so long. I love that weird connection point.
I think first and foremost, I became more and more aware that nuance and subtlety is a weapon and a power, particularly that what woman owns. And it was very clear that these women in the past used that. And to me, it was really, really powerful because it's, like back in those days in the feudal society when women created that kind of language, it was, I mean, what moved me most is that, there's no way they can change the whole system and society, there's no way. But they found their own way in this nuanced and subtle way by coming together in a sisterhood and using this language to negotiate with the dominant power. And that is what women are strong with, and that's what we do, that we're trying to bridge and we're trying to find things from within to recreate and regenerate our strengths and power as a whole. And that's also, I felt like it's like no-brainer that the film's language also has to be subtle and nuanced to carry on the legacy with Nushu and also have a conversation with these women, and also have a conversation with what's going on in China today. So like all of these, I think it fits into this approach that's shown in the film.
Definitely. I'm curious, as far as co-directing, what has that experience been like, and having someone else to bounce ideas off of how to tell this story, what has that experience been like, and the relationship that you two have built with the films?
Yeah, so actually my co-director is my cousin. Her name is Zhao Qing, and this is the second film we worked together. The first film was called Please Remember Me, and that's a love story between my great uncle and my great aunt-in-law about elderly care. And if you watch that film, you see that there are similarities of the subtlety and nuance that we love to play in these films all throughout. And then it was also the very first film that I think it was proven that a film can travel both in China and outside of China. We travel in a lot of festivals outside of China, but also this film was the first documentary impact campaign in China, and we created policy change and also lead up to a theatrical release in China, which is very rare for documentaries. So my cousin's actually 9 years older than me, and when I told her that I wanted to direct this film, and so she came and joined me because I spend a lot of time now living in the U.S. And I have an 8-year-old, so it's hard sometimes for me to go back to China to film. So being her as a presence back in China and had a relationship with both of my characters was very important, and also it created an interesting dimension of the film because we have a generational difference, and she's a woman too. So our thoughts about gender roles, our thoughts about the status of where women are sometimes are not necessarily in sync, which actually is very interesting, but it also created this interesting layer of conversations for me to understand better of where she come from as her generation, and whether my voice representing my generation also has a place, and then how do we navigate that so that we're inclusive of all kind of generations in this film. And also because she's representing an older generation, a little bit older than mine, and also a little bit older than my characters. So when I'm not there, in particularly one of the main character from Shanghai, that she's going through this relationship drama, and it was my cousin, because of who she is, and the relationship that we build with the characters through her, that actually both her and her ex-fiance would go to my cousin and then talk about for help from her. So it was, like, it just shows of, the connection that we have with the characters, and because she's at that kind of role, so it was like a kind of trust from particularly the city girl and her ex-fiance.
That's fascinating, though. What a connection. You just mentioned her as the city girl. I love that city farm kind of flip-flop between the characters. Can you explain to us just how different China is based on where you live, and that also the social and financial issues in the country on those different, whether you're living in some cities are tough, but the farmlands are just as difficult. How important is it to showcase both sides of these women being isolated in different places, but very similarly still being isolated? How important is that to show to American audiences, for us that don't familiarize ourselves with what China is? It's a huge, vast, different country.
Yeah, so I think from the get-go, I was very clear that I needed to cast women from both rural and urban environment who are connected through Nushu. And because, China, what you're saying is absolutely right. And I think it's like true for everywhere else that, the challenges of what women are battling with, in urban settings and in rural settings are very different. To me, I think one way to look at it is that I think in rural areas, there's more of a tradition and cultural kind of confinement of women, and those kind of traditional virtues that's still very much in the play of confining what women's role are. But in urban settings, what our challenges are more affected by economic status, socioeconomic status, capitalism, and gender income gap, all those kind of aspects, I think, has a different kind of effect on the urban woman, and that's like universal as well. And I think the reason that I was really interested to explore the thread of how Nushu itself is being commodified is very much in parallel with how I feel as a woman born and raised from China, is how capitalism plays a role in affecting gender equality in a way. So these are all things that I think in parallel with their storylines and what they're struggling with, and aspects that's affecting Nushu but also affecting women in general.
I'd love to know about the response at some of these film festivals you've been able to take this film to. Our team is based out of Dallas, Texas. I know you guys were down in Austin for the Austin Asian American Film Festival, where you won 2 awards. What have you gained from these American audiences, which I'm pretty sure are diverse audiences, being able to see this film? And what are some of the things you've gained from what they've told you about their film? I feel like this gets people to think on very different levels, and I'm just curious what American audiences have responded to your films. I know Harbor for a Holocaust, for instance, very impactful, and a story we wanted to know more about. It was so great to see that on PBS. I'm curious, how has American audiences been to your film?
I think that I have been told again and again throughout many screenings that women all came to me and said that this is not just about China. We can so relate to it. This is all our experiences. And the second thing that everybody mentioned is about the commodification. How can men behave this way around women? So I think that in that sense, from when I started this project, I know it's not just a Chinese story. I know it's a woman's experience film, but I also very much like to include men to be in the audience. So I don't want to scapegoat men in this film in particular, because I think, it's kind of like a global trend, which actually relates to my next project, of seeing how women in the past, decades of years, that we have done so much work on ourselves to be more advanced, to be more sophisticated, to be more educated, and then to be more highly achieving in a lot of ways. But in terms of understanding on gender dynamics, I think that men do have a lot of catch up to do, especially from the East, and I have to say, and we hope that by showing this film, that it will kind of give men sort of like a hand, so that they can kind of think about if there's anything that, because like when we put the camera there at those scenes of how men reacted, we didn't enforce them to, be different or, that. So if we don't have the camera there, it will be women's experience of their everyday life. And that's what their surrounding is. And I was reading one of the comments from one of the Chinese audience, which is very interesting, is about the way that we show in the film of awkwardness that woman reacts to these kind of situation. And then it's by the look, it's by our silence, because we have no other way to react or to speak up, because it's not in our place to say something like that. So in the end, we're inhaling all these kind of things, but it's very obvious that people can see how women felt in those moments. And by showing those moments, we hope that it gives a tool for men to also think about if there's things they can also react differently, or they can think differently. So anyway, I don't know where I am, but
well, to continue on that and kind of to bring it back to yourself, I'd love to know how cathartic is this experience for you? I know your goal is to give us a Chinese perspective, but one that's an honest one, not one that we've been clouded with politics or whatever. But I'm curious for you personally, how has telling these stories, Harbor of Holocaust, this one, the one you did with her when as a short, how has that impacted you? And as a parent, how do you view that? Has it changed you in your view of how you were educating your young child?
Yeah, I think that it's very difficult for me to come out of a place to make decisions that's not based on fear, because as a Chinese female filmmaker, I was from a community of indie filmmakers in China that's very patriarchal. The established filmmakers are, I think, 95% majority men. So to find a place, first of all, to find a place for a Chinese filmmaker to find a voice is already hard enough, because there are a lot of boundaries we have to test, and also know that where is safety for us, because it's very easy that our status, existence, safety can be taken away instantly, and our subjects too. So to think that, and also navigating through that, but also still find a way to say what we wanted to say, is nothing like people from outside of China can understand. So to say something like that, and also understand that my voice has a place, like I said, that when I started this journey of making this film, gender equality was not, inequality is not something that you can really talk about in China. Me Too was, only existed in China for a couple of months and then disappeared. And feminism, that word alone is a bad word in China. And even though I felt the suppression of how women feel more so than ever, compared to where I grew up, is so present and everywhere among all of my generations, and we all feel that, but there's no place to talk about it. But if I make a film, does that mean that I have a valid point of saying this is what we all experience? Because you don't see that on newspaper in the media, and it's not something that you can talk about. So how can I embrace that and then understand that what I say has an honest place, of course, first of all, but also is coming from a place of integrity, and also is something that people feel, and it represents a perspective that's valid. That all these things takes more because I'm from China and I'm talking about a story about China. But I think this whole process gave me so much more confidence that yes, there is a place. And that's essentially what I think is why it's important that I have my daughter also in a place in the film. She's actually the last shot of the film. So I really wanted to use this film and also the work that we do and my husband do to show her that the importance of finding her own voice in whatever work she does, and how to navigate and then embrace yourself in the voice that you're trying to express. It's very much like me being a filmmaker and why I'm doing this work, why my husband is also in social justice, why is he doing his work. I think that's most important thing that, for my daughter who actually goes to a girls' school, and it's not, I keep telling her, I say it's yes, it's important about what you learn, but it's also more important to know why you learn. And this is essentially how we're building our own narrative, our own voice, and this is where your fulfillment and where your happiness eventually is going to come from.
Well, thank you for having the boldness to give us this, because I do think that the legacy of this film is very much what you just said. So thank you. And as a fan of your work, please never stop. Keep doing what you're doing. And if you've got to keep working with your cousin overseas, do it that way. It works.
Thank you so much.
Violet, it's a pleasure to have you here at Tallgrass. Thank you.
Thank you.